Hi, I'm Melissa Madrigal, and welcome to the very first episode of Living Signal Research. This podcast is a space where the body, the biofield, and the unknown, they all meet, because I didn't set out to become a signal researcher. I just had a body no one could explain, like many of you watching now. Most of my life, I've been navigating Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, chronic pain, extreme sensitivity to my environment, and a medical system that couldn't keep up. But underneath all of that, there was something else happening, a pattern, a language, a signal, and I couldn't unhear it. So this podcast is where I finally say it out loud, where I stop filtering it down to what sounds acceptable or medical or explainable and start telling the truth about what it feels like to live inside a body that feels everything. And we're going to talk about fascia and frequency and emotion and pain and vibration and even contact. Yes, the kind that is hard to explain but impossible to ignore. But I first want to start where I want to tell you where this all began, with EDS and with the realization that maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I was built to feel something the world still didn't have a name for. So what is living signal research? It started as a survival instinct, and then it became a side project. Now it is a full-on investigation. Living signal research is what happens when you stop assuming your body is broken and you start asking what it's detecting. It's the name I gave to the strange but undeniable reality that I've lived in for years. But my pain flares didn't just follow injuries, but weather patterns, where my emotion didn't just feel big, but they felt electromagnetic, where certain sounds or frequencies would send my whole body into tremors or clarity, sometimes both. Eventually, I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. I started recording everything, barometric pressure, EMF fields, pulse rates, vibration shifts. I tested what happened when I stood near certain people or under certain cell phone towers. I measured real-time RF spikes during moments of joy, grief, and even contact. And over time, I realized maybe we are the equipment. And it turns out it all started with EDS. When I was little, no one, again, had a name for it. I just knew that things hurt that shouldn't, that I bruised too easily, that my gut was a mess, that I caught every single virus at the drop of a hat, and somehow no one knew what was wrong. But it wasn't just the pain. My body responded to everything: the heat, the cold, the emotions, the sound, the weather, the room I was in, the person I was standing next to. It was like my system had no filter, like everything was coming in at once. And to be honest, it didn't help that it also had abilities, the kind that lets you see through the veil, feel things before they happen, and know things that I wasn't supposed to know. And listen, the last thing that your mother wants to have to say to the doctor is, oh, and by the way, my daughter sees and talks to ghosts, feels our emotions when we don't tell her what's going on, and tells me things that she shouldn't know all the time. It's not exactly a comforting sentence for a pediatrician, so we just didn't say it. But it was always there, the knowing, the quiet little glitch in the matrix that never went away. And when you grow up in a body that's constantly reacting and a world that's constantly ignoring it, you learn to shut up real fast. You learn to survive, but you don't stop sensing, and eventually the signals get too loud to ignore. There was a moment that everything changed for me. It wasn't one single event. It was more like a quiet click, a shift in the way that I was looking at my body, a shift in the way I was looking. It was as it was looking back at me. And I remember laying in bed mid-flare, fascia in full lockdown. And I was thinking, this can't only be about joints and fascia, because what I'm feeling isn't just pain, it's pattern. There's something trying to come through. And that's when it hit me. What if this isn't a health condition? What if it's a form of perception? And this is where it gets interesting, because science has already proven that perception changes reality. In quantum physics, there's something called the double slit experiment. If you've never heard of it before, it basically shows that particles, tiny bits of matter, behave differently depending on whether or not they're being observed. Let me say that again. Just the act of watching them changed how they move. When no one's looking, they act like a wave, scattered, spread out, pure potential. But the moment they are observed, they collapse into a defined pattern, a particle, a decision, which means consciousness affects matter. Awareness changes behavior. Observation becomes participation. And when I learned that, I thought, if this is true for particles, what does it mean for a body like mine? A body that's always watching, always feeling, always aware. What does it mean to live inside a system that reacts before thought? What kind of interface is that? But here's the thing, I didn't expect. Sometimes when you finally start listening, what you hear is hard, because witnessing the truth doesn't mean that things get easier. It actually meant that I started seeing the full cost of everything I've been holding back, everything my body had been carrying, everything I had ignored just to keep functioning. The moment that I stopped trying to control the symptoms and started witnessing them, everything began to shift. But this wasn't my first time waking up to the signal. I actually started tuning into this consciousness, body awareness, perception when I was around 15 years old. That's when I first started learning to observe my body from the inside out, to sense patterns, to feel that there was something deeper going on beneath these symptoms. At that point, I went out for my yoga teacher training certificate so that I could open my first yoga studio at 18. It was a passion of mine to help people heal and feel better, because I never wanted anybody to feel and grow up in a body like I did. But along the way, I got pulled out of this awareness. Life got complicated. I went through a chapter that required me to disconnect from myself just to keep going. And for about 7 years, I stopped listening, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. And that's when my body really started to fall apart. By 21, things began collapsing. At 23, I could barely walk. I lost stability in my knees and in my hips, and my connective tissue just wouldn't hold anymore. Pain became something I lived inside of, not something that came and went. And when I finally came back to myself, when I finally left the chapter and started reconnecting to my body around 26, that's when the full weight of it actually hit. Because the moment that I started observing again, really witnessing myself with no filter, my body collapsed even further. It was like all the pain I've been holding on to came rushing forward the moment I turned to face it. And then the internal collapse. Food became my enemy. My allergies, which were pretty bad in childhood, got worse, way worse. By the time my MCAS fully flared up, I only ate about 10 foods safely. That's not a lifestyle. That is survival mode. My dysautonomia got really severe. My nervous system couldn't quite regulate anymore. My heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature all started spiking and crashing at random. I couldn't lie flat without getting dizzy. Couldn't eat without feeling like I was going to pass the hell out. Then came the diagnosis that confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't in my head. This was my body literally being crushed from the inside out. Superior mesenteric artery syndrome. It's a part of your small intestines trapped between two arteries, compressed to the point that food stops moving. And then they find nutcracker syndrome, where the left renal vein is compressing, cutting off blood flow from my kidneys. And then gastric stasis from prolonged SMA. My stomach doesn't empty properly anymore. I'm at 87% immobile. Eating has become something I have forced myself to do carefully, strategically, because vomiting is my worst fear, emetophobia. I live with the threat of it every day. Doctors don't want to put an NG tube in right now out of fear of full gastric paralysis before surgery, so I'm trying to hang on. Sometimes I hold it together with Zofran and willpower. Other days I lie there wondering how much more my body can take. Worst condition to have when you have emetophobia, by the way. And it's easy to call it rare, to call it genetic, to call it a complicated case, but I know what it is. It's a body that's been screaming for decades, a body that's never safe in a world that it was born into, a body that spent so long trying to survive the signal, it started to collapse under the weight of it. And here's what I want you to know. By every medical standard, I should be on a feeding tube right now. I am malnourished, my body's collapsing, I have structural compression in multiple systems, limited food tolerance, delayed gastric emptying, a nervous system that cannot regulate itself without constant adaptation, and yet, here I am, still functioning, still speaking, not because my body isn't working well by any means, but because I'm in constant interface with it. Every single day, I communicate with my cells. I observe, I listen, I adjust. I tune my awareness to what's happening, not just mechanically, but energetically. I ask my body what it needs. I ask it to keep going. This is not magic. It's biology, it's interoception, it's neuroplasty, it's observation effect applied to the self. Because when you live in a body that's fragile, you don't get to zone out, you don't get to ignore the signals, you become the translator, the regulator, the system overrider. And in some ways, that made me stronger than I ever imagined. And what I've come to realize is this: I'm not surviving in spite of my body, I'm surviving with it, through it, by collaborating with it at the most granular level. Every day is an experiment. Every meal, every flare, every moment of rest or panic or decision. There's no autopilot in a body like this, but there also is no denial. Because when you live at this edge, you either numb out or you become the participant in your biology, and I choose to participate. That's not strength like people think it is. It's not pushing through. It's a different kind of strength. It's precision, it's attunement, it's waking up every day knowing that your awareness, your presence is part of what keeps the machine running. And that brings me back to the double slit experiment. The particles don't behave the same way when they're observed. They shift, they collapse, they choose a path. Observation changes outcome. Consciousness influences behavior, not because we're in control, but because we're a part of the equation. I am, in my life, the variable. I am both the observer and the system being observed. And my body responds to that. My cells respond to that. And I truly believe that if you've ever been told that you were imagining it, if you've ever been gaslit by your own body or the world around it, you're not weak or crazy. You are a living variable in the field, and that changes everything. None of this came out of nowhere. For the last 16 years, I have been deeply studying, sometimes quietly, sometimes obsessively, everything from integrative health to biofield science to fascia to trauma to metaphysics to multidimensional phenomena. I have immersed myself in both the physical and the energetic. I have studied the nervous system and cellular biology and vibration and perception. I've also studied with and been mentored by some of the greatest in the fields of consciousness and UAP research and dimensional theory. But I didn't expect this to become public. For a long time, I thought this was just for me, but the signal had other plans because recently I was pulled into something much larger. I was asked to step into the role of director of research for a national organization focused on anomalous phenomenon. And that what started as private journaling and quiet tracking has now become a full scale. This podcast, Living Signal Research, is part of it all. This is where I get to bring everything together: the body, the science, the field, the signal, and the very real experiences of people who have felt things in this world and still don't know how to measure it. So now that you know where this started, let me tell you where this is going. Living Signal Research isn't about my story. It's about making space for stories most people never hear. The ones that don't fit into easy explanations, the ones that live in the body, the fascia, in the quiet fields around us. This podcast is a place for all of that. We're going to be talking about fascia and frequency and biofield perception and environmental sensitivity and consciousness and the way the body communicates with the mind. We'll dive into signal sensitivity and survival science and human experience of living inside a system that was never built to handle this much input. And I will not be doing it alone. I will be bringing on guests, people who have felt the signal, people who have collapsed, who have recalibrated, who have remembered, people like you, maybe exactly like you, who have stories to share, signals to interpret, and patterns to reflect back into the world. There will be a link in the show notes and on my website if you would like to come on and share. You don't need credentials. You don't need to be healed. You just need to be someone who knows what it feels like to live in a body that picks up more than it should. Because this isn't a platform for performance. It's a space for precision, for perception, for people who are still listening, even when it hurts. This is living signal research. And the signal is alive in me, in you, in all of us. And I think that's exactly what the double slit experiment is trying to tell us, that observation changes everything. That when something is finally seen, it behaves differently. It releases, it breaks, it reorganizes. And for me, that breaking became the beginning of truth.